Just a switch on the bottom.
Say, I am Mary Martin's granddaughter, but... Is this working? Okay, great. Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad you decided to come. This means a lot to me, being part of this parish and being able to share with you all. I know I've had a lot of people ask me questions about it, and I can only say so much in a few words and in a short conversation. So I'm very glad that I was able to come and share this all with you. So my trip to Antarctica is part of my grad thesis research. I am doing it under Kurt Panter. He is a faculty member at UGSU. And I was doing a study, an independent study on this specific region of Antarctica, but I was just reading it on papers. I didn't think at all, if you had told me 2 years ago when I started the study that I'd actually be able to go and see some of the things in person, I would have told you were crazy. So then my professor asked me if I would like to go on the trip that he had already been funded to go to, funded by NSF, National Science Foundation. And I was like, well, I can't really say no to that. Yeah. And then I was supposed to go down as an undergraduate, but because I graduated early with my bachelor's, he's like, well, you've already done all this research. Why don't you just turn it into a master's thesis? And I was like, well, I can't say no to that. So I decided, yes, I will go on this trip. And so we left California, and we made it all the way over to New Zealand in February, yes. So in the southern hemisphere, it was fall. It was not winter like it was up here. New Zealand is a very temperate place, so it was much warmer than it was in January up here. But it was still pretty cool out. So our boat, the Nathaniel B. Palmer, is a very specific kind of research vessel. It is called an ice crusher ship. So it is specifically designed to break through ice. Now don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure it can break through 6 meters of ice. It's a lot of ice, but trust me, there were times where we were not gonna make it through some ice. So we were docked in Littleton, which is a port on the eastern coast of New Zealand. It is, if you've heard of Christchurch, it is literally right over the mountain that separates these two cities. And as you can see, the city is just made up all along the mountain range. Those are actually volcanoes, dormant, ancient, but those are volcanoes nonetheless. And it was very beautiful to see. And so we were docked here. We landed a couple days before we actually set sail. So we got to go on the boat, kind of tour around. And let me tell you, the first time I stepped on that boat, I was super confused because all of the hulls looked the same. All the doors looked the same. I was like, I'm gonna get lost. But I got the hang of it pretty quickly. And then, so from New Zealand all the way down to the specific area of Antarctica that we were going to, it was a 10-day transit on waters. The sea didn't get too rough, but I had never been on the ocean before. This is the first time I ever saw the ocean, let alone sail on it. So I was expecting quite a bit heavy seas, but some of the people who do this a lot, they were like, that was nothing. I personally did not get seasick, but a lot of people did. I thought that the swaying on the boat was super calming, so I had some of the best sleep I have ever had. So our trip was about 3 months long. We left in February and we came back in April. And again, in the southern hemisphere, it was fall, and then it turned into winter. Just a little bit of a warning. Sometimes I will just start talking about this. If you get me going, I'll use a lot of terms that other people are like, I don't know what that means. So just a bit of a warning. These are some of the terms that I might end up using. MT, specifically in multi-beam, and volcanism is not something from Star Trek. It is actually a geological term. So to begin with, just a little bit of ship life. I'm just going to show you some images of rooms and areas that were on the ship itself. Hello? It died.
anticipated this.
That's okay.
Keep talking.
So this was my cabin. The rooms were all pretty small. They all generally looked like this, depending on where they are on the ship. Sometimes the bunk beds were on the other side of the wall, but they all generally looked like this. The captain and the head scientist got super fancy rooms, and they were much bigger than this. But you have 2 bunks. I did share my room with a roommate. Her name was Hal. She was on another science group that was on the boat. We just had a tiny little bit of space. We had little cabinets on both sides that we could put our stuff in. And over here was a tiny little bathroom with a shower, a sink, and a toilet. And that was about it. And then this picture up here, that is my view out my window. It was great. Not a lot of windows had a lot of great views out, because there were a lot of pillars and stairwells and pipes and all that stuff. But it was nice to just open up the window and get a little bit of light in. Light was very important during your day. You'd have to look out the window and be like, oh yeah, there's a world out there. This was the galley, so this is where we would eat our meals. We did have actually 4 meals a day. We had 4 meals a day because everyone's shifts were split up between 12 hours. So my shift was from 12 in afternoon, 12 to midnight. So my first meal of the day was actually lunch, not breakfast. I missed breakfast food a lot. And then at midnight, they would actually do the 4th meal of the day, which was mid-rat, so rations at midnight. So that was my last meal of the day, so I chose to eat it. We also had a couple fun things that we did in the galley. If we need to do a fun gathering, or I'll show you a picture later on, but we had a fun St. Patty's Day activity. And this is the other side of the galley, just turning a little bit, and so that's where we would get our food. That was more of like a cafeteria style, where we just go in a line, get our food, the drinks, and lots of snacks. We were very well fed. Some people are like, oh, did you have to, just eat a lot of the same stuff? Did you have to ration a lot of things? No, we were fed too well. We were fed quite well. So they had a lot of just general snacks, and if you didn't want anything that they were serving, there were some peanut butter and jelly and bread and stuff like that, cereal, lots of yogurt and juice and stuff like that we could eat. About 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, me and 2 of the scientists I worked very closely with on my shift, it was tea time and snack time. So we would take a little break from our work, and we'd go and we'd get a snack and some tea from the galley. So one of the big areas that we had on the ship for science operations was the back deck. Now this was a very secure location. You could only go on the back deck if you had a hard hat on or you were with an MT, so our Marine techs, because this is where all the operations would go. So this is where we put the equipment in and out of the water. There were cables everywhere. It was also heated, so when the ice and snow came in, we could still walk back there safely and move things around. These 2 images are from the engine rooms. We got a tour of the engine rooms toward the end of the cruise, and it was extremely loud down there. We had to have ear protection, so they did a little presentation up on one of the top levels about what everything was. I could not tell you. It was fascinating, but I don't remember much. So then we could just go in and we walked around. You could just look at this stuff and be fascinated by all the gears and works and engines and everything. There were 4 engines on the ship. We only had to use 2. Most of the time we did only run on 1, but there were 4 there just in case. So this is the bridge. So this was on the very, very, very top, the 5th deck. And this is where the captain and all the mates, they would run the ship and drive the boat. We would have to come up here every once in a while to check in and make sure that where we wanted to go was possible. So they were constantly checking weather patterns. So we had to make sure that the ice, where the ice was coming in, that we could go and the ship could get through it, that the wind direction was good, because those were all variables that we had to depend on. And we could also just come up here and chill out, because this was one of the only rooms on the ship that had all windows. And if you didn't want to go outside when it was negative 30 degrees, you could just go up there, and there were heaters, so you could stand in front of the heaters and look outside, and it was the perfect time. This is called the winch control room. So this is where they would do all the cable operations. So there was an operator in there at all times, and they were in charge of doing all the levers and everything they had to do to pull in and out all of the cables. I could not tell you what the majority of any of this does, but all of the laptops and whatnot over there, those are from my specific research team's stuff. Those computers operated our TOCAM, and I'll talk about that and the specifics of what that did. So they would sit at those laptops and they would get live images, and they could tell the machinery what to do down in the water. Very important laptops. I thought I had a better picture, but I ended up not having a better picture. This was our lab space. So all the lab spaces were on the bottom deck, above the engine rooms. You can hear them, though. So this was called the dry lab. So this was kind of in the middle part of the ship, and this was our assigned area where we could lay out all of our samples and look at them and do all of our stuff. The Pelican cases were not there all the time. And this room is called the forward dry lab, and this is where I spent 80% of my time. It was either in here or in the dry lab in the back. The dry lab that I just showed you is actually behind this room. So this room we also called the computer lab, because it had a lot of the computers and all those TV screens. There was also all of the big monitors. They had to keep them cool, so it was always 60 degrees, which you would think, oh yeah, 60 degrees, that's perfect. It was always cold. We were always bundled up, because once you stepped out of this room, you're like, oh, the rest of the ship is heated. So this is kind of just on that side, just shifting your view a little bit. These people on here, these were all in my science group, and we kind of chose that area to kind of make our headquarters, so I spent a lot of time down there in that corner. And sitting up on the desk and looking out the port windows was one of the best times of the day, looking for penguins. And then if you shift your view just like this way, you see all the big monitors, and it goes back even further, and that's what we had to keep cool. This, if I can get my mouse, this right here I will explain a little bit further, but that was an important screen that I stared at for a while. And right here, this is what we called the watch station. So this is where all of these TV screens showed live footage from cameras that were outside the ship, so we could see what was going on in the back deck. They would have different screens of important information, such as our heading, the wind direction, the temperature, the water temperature, all these different graphs of operations that were going on. The coordinates was a constant, so we could look up and we could say, okay, this is exactly where we are, this is what speed we're going, this is the direction we're going. And I stared at these screens a lot. When we first left New Zealand, once we got out of New Zealand waters, we could then legally start doing our mapping of the seafloor. So I would have to sit here and manually log on those yellow paper every 15 minutes our coordinates, our speed, the date, the time, how fast we were going, and any other notes that needed to be done. I would also have to check and make sure that our multi-beam, so what we used to map the seafloor, was actually running. Was it within our depth range? Because then if it wasn't, if the water got deeper, we had to go into that screen that I showed you before and manually go in and change the depth range so that the beams were actually touching the seafloor and we were actually getting data so that we could actually finish our maps. So every 15 minutes, I would have to do all of that. It wasn't that bad. So I want to talk just a little bit about why we were down there, what we were looking for science-wise. So if you haven't gathered, I was down there looking at geology things, volcanism. So we were looking at underwater volcanic activity. Now, something that a lot of people don't know is that Antarctica is actually mainly volcanic. You wouldn't think about that, but it actually is. Now, one of the most active volcanoes down there is called Mount Erebus. It's actually a pretty famous volcano. A lot of research has been done on it. My professor, that's his life work. That's what he's done. He's been down into Antarctica 11 times, and the Mount Erebus is what he does his research on. And so I've done a lot of reading on that area at Mount Erebus, and I got to see it live. And I had a little fangirl moment. Mount Erebus, an interesting fact, is that it has a year-round lava lake, which is very fabulous. So, just a broad overview of kind of what we were doing is to determine the contribution of magmatic and volcanic activity to heat flow. So in this area, there is a rift system, okay? So it's when the crust is pulling apart, and in the middle, like when you're stretching putty or Play-Doh or something, it gets thinner in the middle because you're stretching it out. So that means that your crust is getting thinner, and that gives an avenue for the mantle to come up, and that increases the geothermal activity. And so you'll get volcanoes, you'll get lava flows, you'll get fault zones and all that kind of stuff. So we were looking at this specific rift system and seeing the geothermal activity and if it is still active. And then we're also looking at to constrain the frequency, type, and extent of volcanic processes within the rift, and if it contains, and it's constraints on the morphologies of the seamounts that we were looking at down there. So to see if, is this explosive activity or is it more effusive activity? Is it a mixture of both? Are these structures actually volcanic, or are they more of a sedimentary process of just gas coming up and spewing out sediments? And how does that all affect what these seamounts look like? Why are they shaped like that? And does that affect, and is it due to the volcanic activity down there? And then also, because we're in Antarctica, there's lots of glaciers and ice that come through. And some scientists spend their life work just looking at ancient ice patterns. You can actually see that by what the ocean floor actually sees. You can see moraines, you can see where the ice actually touched the bottom of the sea floor, and people have mapped out all of that and looked at its regression and transgression. So then you see that, but then how does that affect volcanism? How does that affect these formations that are coming up? And does that coincide with when ice was in the water, or does that happen when the ice has retreated and then the volcanic activity occurs? So glaciovolcanism is something we were looking at. So these are just an overview, just kind of get an idea of there were these different regions, and we split those up because of their geological significance. So in a broad sense, this whole region is part of the West Antarctic Rift System, or WARS. So if you see these abbreviations, this is what I'm referencing. And then the EVP is all down in this area, and there's a bunch of ancient and dormant volcanoes, including Mount Erebus, which is active. And then you have the Terra Rift System, which is the specific trough on the ocean floor. And then the Victoria Land Basin is significant just because it's geologically different than the other areas on the seafloor in that region. And then the Terra Rift Volcanic Field includes all of these seamounts that we assume and have confirmed are volcanic. So that's just another close-up of the area that we're working in. So we went and we were down in this area for 3 months and mapping all of that seafloor there. So then just a little bit more focus on what we were specifically looking for. So we wanted to confirm that these seamounts that we were going to be mapping and sampling are actually volcanic, because there was a lot of controversy in the science community, especially with some of the flat top mounds that are down there. People thought maybe they were only sediment, so gas coming up and just spewing out sediment and creating those kind of structures. Many Maybe they thought they were carbonates, and the others thought they were volcanic because of all the other volcanic activity down there. No one just really knew. There was just a lot of debate over that area. And so we wanted to go down there and actually confirm, get real samples and bring up the rocks. The rocks don't lie. If you see a volcanic rock, there you go. And then a lot of study has been done in this area, and there has been bathymetry that has been done, so some of the mapping has been done, but it's not great quality and it's not complete. So it was really hard to look at these structures because you can't really see anything on them. So one of our main goals was to actually go down there and do complete mapping and actually get good imagery so we can actually look at these sea mounds and kind of look at their form, and that can help us interpret what we want to find. And then morphology, when I say morphology, I mean the structure and how the seamount looks. So we want to know what processes cause these formations, was there actual ice interaction, and if it's explosive or effusive. And then place all this volcanism in a timeline. As I said, a lot of this area has already been studied and some dates have already been gathered. And we just want to create a story of this area. One of the things about this kind of science is we want to create a story. Why did all this happen at once? Was there different times? Were there different pulses? Kind of just creating a timeline. So we want to place these in the timeline of the West Antarctic Rift System. And how does that play out? And then, of course, we want to find the composition of all these rocks, which means its chemical makeup, so the elements that make it up. We can tell a lot about a rock by its chemical makeup, and I will kind of explain that in the next slide, which might give a lot of people a headache, but and then its mineralogy. And of course, those elements go into the makeup of a mineral, and then the makeup of a mineral make up what a rock is and what type of rock it is. So if we find specific kinds of minerals in a rock, we can instantly tell a lot about it. And if we don't find certain minerals, we can also tell a lot about it. There are also a lot of different kinds of magma series, and that simply has to do with their composition and the elements that we find in them. And that also goes in with the different kinds of tectonic areas that you can study. So this is just a closer up of, this is a satellite image, and this is just a closer up of the area that we were in. Okay, so when I say composition, and I mean all the chemical makeup and all the elements that go into it, we plot them on charts that kind of look like this. Now these are just some examples of charts that we use. We can just get the chemical composition and then we can deduct them on different kinds of charts, like ternary charts and all that. So the kinds of elements that we find in a rock just help us to determine where in the earth that formed, where did this magma come from? Was it deep in the earth, or did it come up further in the crust and develop there? So these charts can tell us, is it more of a silica saturated, or does it have more of a sodium saturated? And that can tell us where in the earth, deep down or shallow up, it was created. And on the left, those are called spirograms, and those have trace elements, so those are more rare elements, and that can help us deduce where the source of melting and what processes it went through to come to that, be that kind of rock. So I hope that didn't give you a headache. I could talk on and on and on about minerals and all that.
They're calling you professor.
So these were all of the, I might have missed a couple, but I'm pretty sure I did all of the seamounts that we were studying down there. Now a lot of these seamounts were surprises. We did not know they existed. So Davy Bank is the formation that I'm actually doing my specific thesis research on. Now from previous studies that had gone down there, Davy Bank was already discovered and it was named, but that's it. So pretty much they knew it was down there, they kind of knew what it looked like, and they named it, and that's it. And then the Flapjack Field is that area of flat top mounds that I was talking about that had a lot of the debate on how they were formed and what they are. So that area has been widely studied, yet nothing's really been decided about it, and not a lot of concrete evidence has been done on them. So that was one of our main focuses, but we actually got to name it. We're like, okay, this is called the Flapjack Field because they look like pancakes. That's why we called it the Flapjack Field. And then specific mounds we named pancake in different languages. That was a fun thing to do. Buford Bank is down here. Buford Island is actually aerial, so that means you can see it on top of the water. And I have some pictures of it later on. And Franklin Island as well, so you can see those just on top of land. They're on the ocean floor, but they also peek up out of the water. But then Buford Bank are small sea mounds and ranges underneath the water, right by the island. And those were also known, but nothing's been deduced about it. And then the ones in the orange, I forgot I had little things where they are. So there's the Davy Bank is in the white. The pink squares are Flapjack Field and Buford Bank. And then the orange, those are some areas that also were kind of known. Like you can look at a satellite image and go, yeah, there's something there. And some of the papers that I've read have referenced them, but again, they've never been mapped, they've never been sampled or studied or anything. So we got to go and look at those and map those out, and we got to name them. I got to name Squid Ridge. That was my contribution, because if you look at the map, it looks like a squid.
How big a map are you showing us? Is this 50 miles by 50 miles or 20 miles?
One of my maps has a scale.
Just approximate.
Like the formations themselves or the whole map?
The whole map.
A couple 100 kilometers.
Square?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So like specifically Davy Bank there, that's about like maybe 20 kilometers long.
So this is a big area.
This is a very, very big area.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I have a map that has a scale, but
It's all right.
I don't know off the top of my head. So yeah, it would take about maybe a day and a half to get from the Flapjack Field to Franklin Island.
Oh,
Yeah. Through ice, which we were going pretty slow, so not too long, but it is a trip across these. So we spent all 3 months just going between all of these places. And the green squares, the green squares are surprises. We did not know a lot of these existed. So when we were there mapping, we're like, oh look, there's a nice little seamound here. Let's go dredge it. Let's go get some samples. Let's name it. So those were specifics. Now my specific research is on the Davy Bank structure and is one of the largest unknowns. As I said, people knew it was there and they named it, but they don't know anything else. And it rises from the seafloor about 600 meters, and then it's 200 meters below sea level. And then for what I'm focusing on is I wanted to complete the mapping, so we did. We completed the mapping, we got it all done, we got it. There's a few holes, but that was due to ice conditions. And then I want to know the composition, so it's mineralogy and the elemental makeup of it. And if there's a stratigraphy, when I say stratigraphy, I mean, is there different layers on it? Is there a type of rock on the bottom that's not on the top? Is it uniform? And stuff like that. And then I want to know, is there an application to all the other volcanics that go on in this region? Are there types of rocks that come from this formation that are found in other places in Antarctica? Or are there unique rocks specific to this area? And then of course, does this formation have any relation to the glaciers or the ice in that area? And where does that fit in the timeline that we're creating? And so for analysis of the samples, we'll get fresh samples. We have fresh samples. I have a lot of rocks to look at. I've already stared at a lot of these rocks. I've already done half of this actually. So we finish the mapping, we send it out for isotope dating, and then we also getting the geochemistry, so the elemental makeup, and we get that from the minerals themselves and the ground mass, which just means the rock itself. And then of course we also get thin sections, which look like this. This is what a rock looks like at 30 micrometers under a microscope. So we put light through it, and then you can look at the different minerals. So there's different minerals there. There's some olivine, there's some plagioclase, and some magnetite and chromite there. And you can spin these, and there you get different optical properties. And this is one of my favorite things about geology. I love looking at these. So I will get to be one of the first people ever to look at a thin section of some of these rocks. So our science operations. On the boat, there were 3 different science groups. So there was my science group that did geology, oceanography, and geophysics. And then there was another science group that did, we called them the coring group. Everyone called them the coring group because they did sediment cores. So they took a pipe with a plastic sleeve and they shot it down into the seafloor and they gathered up sediment, and they were looking at free gases and bacteria. And then there was another group that were biologists, and so they had a specific type of operation that they went down and they gathered up organisms. Most of them were kind of like tiny, tiny. You could see them with the naked eye, but they were itty bitty. So our main operation that we did to get fresh rock samples on these formations was dredging. And so right there on the right is our dredge. It was a giant metal basket, and then we would drop it down on the A-frame there on the back deck, and then we would lower it down onto the seafloor from the winch control room. Now before we actually put it in the water, we had to decide, of course, where we wanted the ship to go, where we wanted the dredge to actually go down into the water. We couldn't just randomly decide, like, oh, let's put it here. We think the formation is here. So we would get our bathymetry, and we would then put it through QGIS, which was our main GIS program that we used, and we would create a profile. And then we just choose part of that profile, the steepest part of the profile where we think we get the most fresh samples from, and then we turn it into a paper you can see down here. We have our profile with the coordinates, and then we tell the ship, like, okay, can we go here? Is this where we can go? Can you go along these coordinates? And they'd say, no, the wind isn't going that way, you gotta pick a different way. Or, no, the ice won't let us go that way because it's drifting, pick a different way. So there was kind of some variables that we had to play with to find the perfect profile to go along with. Once we found that and the bridge was all cool with it, they'd get into place, so they'd find their start coordinates. We'd lower the dredge into the water. Before it hit the bottom, we'd move the ship to the end of the profile, and then the dredge would actually hit the seafloor or the side of the formation, and then they would reel in, or we say paying in, more terminology, would pay in the cable, and it would bring up the dredge basket along the side of the formation, and we'd sit in the winch control room up at that screen in the far, far corner up there, where it would tell us the depth of where the ship is and where our profile is. It would show us the coordinates. It would show us also the tension of the winch cable. And that was very important because we would watch that, because it could only, of course, there was a limit, but it was a very strong cable. We never went over that maximum. But we would watch the numbers and we'd watch the graph, and when there was a big pull in the tension, a big spike in the tension, we'd write that down, we note that down where it was on our profile, because that means that the dredge caught on something, and that was something good. So then we're actually catching something, we're actually getting fresh samples. And so, this is what we would wear on the back deck when we actually went out to the dredge once it came out of the water. We got this lovely, lovely outfit. It was not fun to take on and off, let me tell you. So what we're wearing right now is our wet back gear, or PPE. And so I would wear pretty much like snow pants, thermal overalls over just regular daily outfit. I would wear a fleece jacket, and then I would put on the rubber overalls over top because it was always very, very wet out. And then we would put on our float coats. These are our float coats. They were thermal, so they're pretty much like our parkas, but something that we can get muddy and wet and all that stuff. And if we fall off, you can float in the water. That's why it's called a float coat. And of course, we're also wearing a balaclava, which is, you put it on your head. It's kind of like a stocking cap, but it's very form-fitting, and it goes on your neck. And then a fleece gaiter to help protect you from the wind. Though sometimes breathing was harder, so I usually just left it on my neck. You can see Kurt there, my professor, he's wearing it over his face. And then we had to wear our hard hats out on the back deck for safety purposes. And whenever you see the bright yellow pants, that's me. Because I'm a small person, so I got all the extra smalls. So this is just them, our marine techs, pulling, I think this is pulling out of the water.
Now, when they're dredging your stuff, are the other groups dredging?
We were the only group that used the dredge.
Okay.
Yeah, because we were actually getting rock. Everyone else, they did not want rock.
Okay.
Not want rock. We were the only people that wanted rocks. Everyone else wanted mud.
But you had to coordinate your path with their path.
No.
No. You won.
So each science group was funded for a different amount of time. So this cruise was 3 months long because we had 3 science groups on. I guess I didn't explain that. So some of the science group actually had cruises planned early on, a couple of years ago, but due to certain circumstances in 2020, they were booted out of their cruise. So they pretty much, NSF decided, we're all going to shove you all on one ship at one time. So a lot of people that do this for a living, like they do this a lot, they're like, this is an unnatural amount of time to be out on a ship. And with this many people, there were around 64, 5-ish people, scientists and crew. So we split up our time down there to the different groups. So our science group got a specific amount of time. We had funded like 24 days of science to do. The biologists got 6 full days of science, and the other group got the
And they had to
rest.
stay for 3 months.
Yeah, we had stayed on there for 3 months. So some days it was our turn to do science. Other days it was other groups' turn to do science. So if it was another group's turn to do science, I was either cleaning bathymetry, I was looking at rocks, or doing anything else that the group needed me to do. It was kind of all hands on deck. On your shift, you just kind of did whatever needed to be done. So when we were doing dredging, it was our funded amount of time to actually do work. Dredging was also one of the easiest operations to do, especially in harsher conditions. So a lot of times with the coring group, coring was extremely difficult to do when conditions got worse, when there was ice and wind. It was not easy to do. So a lot of times they're like, nope, we can't do coring. Let's do dredging. So there was a lot of on-call dredging, like, okay, I guess we're doing the dredging now. And then we'd rush, we'd like create our profile, and then like, okay, can we do this? Okay. And then we'd go out and just do it. So we had a lot of unexpected dredges. We were originally planning to do, with the amount of funds and time that we had, we were planning on doing 20 dredges. We did 50 dredges.
Yay, good for you.
So there was a lot of opportunity, and especially on those sea mounds that we didn't expect to know, like we didn't know they were down there. We found them and we're like, hey Captain, can we dredge these? So there was a lot of opportunity that was open to us, and it was fantastic. So we got to do a lot more science than we actually were expecting to, and that was just great. It was fabulous. And so here we are. Once you pulled up the dredge, they would put it over one of these baskets, these boxes, and the dredge opened up from the bottom, so we didn't have to like tip it over. We had to do that once because it was clogged, but that was very difficult to do. So we would just open it from the bottom, all the contents would fall out into that box. Now dredges contents depended on where we were and what kind of formation we were on. A lot of them were just mud, lots of mud, with just a few rocks in it. And I was kind of tired of digging through mud occasionally. It was smelly and gooey and lots of weird sea creatures. They had lots of worm-looking things that, yeah, very fleshy-looking creatures that were just in the mud. So one of our, what? Oh, some of them, they looked like severed fingers. They looked like severed fingers that were like swollen up. It was not pretty. So one of our jokes that
For supper.
yeah, you would joke around that with that too. One of our jokes throughout the ship, I started it actually. I would go, ugh, biology, and of course there were biologists on the cruise. So one of the head biologists would go, "No, Katie, you gotta come to the dark side." I'm like, no, you come to our side. So we all tried to recruit each other to different kinds of sciences, which was cool in its own way. But yes, ugh, biology was a common phrase. And then we got other people to start saying it too.
So if you had mud and stuffed animals or something like, the other groups that were interested in that could not use your dredges?
They could.
Oh,
Yes,
okay.
so if we found an animal or something, we'd call Kevin, who was one of the biologists who did like the larger animals. The other biologist wanted the tiny little things in a specific species, but Kevin, he wanted the big stuff. So if we found a starfish, which was quite often, we found some squid, some octopi, and then the silver fingers, lots of that kind of stuff. And a few plant type things, lots of corals. So we would call it like, Kevin, do you want this? Or do you not want this? It's kind of dead. He liked to dissect them and find parasites. That's what he did. We did have a few fish. There were a couple of fish that we found in the dredges. But it was very nice because all of us scientists did get along. So that was an absolute blessing. So we could say like, hey, biologists, we found this cool thing. Do you want it? And then if one of the other groups found a rock in their sediment or their sled finds, they'd be like, hey guys, we found a rock. Do you want it? So that was a fun aspect of it, that we could all kind of share and watch each other do the science. So these are just some pictures of them bringing in the dredges. And so here, this is on the port side. That's the terminology. So on the port side of the ship, they had this nice, cool little sieve. So it had netting that was on different sizes, so we could put our rocks on there, and then we could wash them off, which was very nice to do. So we didn't have to do it inside. We could do that until it got to the negatives, and the water started freezing and clogging up the sieve, and we could no longer use it, which was a sad day because it saved us a lot of time. And we had to do this all fairly quickly as we possibly could, because at times we were doing dredges back to back to back to back. So as we were bringing up the dredge and dumping it out, the ship was already moving to the next location. So we had to do this all pretty fast, and it was frigid out. And your fingers could only take so much, even if they were in rubber gloves with linings and hot hands. I forgot to say, another thing that we would find in our dredges, other than rocks and severed fingers, was sponges. Not fun, don't So these sponges in Antarctica have spicules. They are silica-based spicules, aka fiberglass. So contaminating all of our dredges were all of these sponge spicules, and they were sharp, very, very sharp, and so they would go through our rubber gloves and liners and hot hands. So they were kind of everywhere. You found them everywhere. If we laid out our rocks and you like leaned over, you just got them all over your clothes. It was not fun. So that became another joke around the ship. We'd be like, oh, did you get poked by a sponge spicule? None of the other science groups believed that this happened. They're like, no, you're crazy. I don't think this is a thing. Until they came in and looked at our rocks, we're like, oh. Oh yeah. And then they touch and go, oh yeah, I was poked.
So it was all contaminated from man?
Not contamination isn't the right word. It was just full of, like, our dredges were just, there was gobs and gobs and gobs of these sponge spicules, and because we drag up the surface, so we'd stir up all this kind of sea creatures and all the mud, so then we'd pull up, with the rocks, we'd pull up all these animals, including the sponges, and then the sponge spicules, because they eject them, it just gets mixed up in the mud. And if you grab a handful of mud, you grab a handful of the sponge spicules.
And so the sponges are natural there?
The sponges are natural, yeah, they're native to Antarctica.
Oh, okay.
That is a defensive response?
I think so, I assume so, I don't know.
You don't, she's not
I
in
assume.
biology.
Yeah, I like biology.
What would Gramps say?
Right?
Yeah.
So here's some more pictures of us just working. So we had shovels, we would use our hands, and we do this as fast as humanly possible. And there I am. This is one of our first stretches, actually. I remember this day very specifically because we were super excited because this was our first stretch. This was the first time I got all dressed up. I went out on the back deck. I was digging through the mud, and I found all these cool rocks. So there I am with a big grin on my face. So after our dredges came in and we had them all washed off, we would bring them into our lab room. So this is some better pictures of what the lab room looked like. And we would take the rocks and we lay them out. We covered the countertops in an absorbent paper. So if the rocks were still wet, which they usually always were, it would absorb the water. And then we could also write on it. We could line, because we would group them according to their types, their lithologies, as we say. So that just we would organize them in their different types and sizes and all that, so we could spread them out and just look at them. So if we weren't doing dredges and I wasn't cleaning bathymetry, this is what I was doing.
Now, when you emptied the dredge, it was from the full length of that path, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you really didn't have a specific point you could go back to if you needed to.
Yes and no, because when you have that like tension spike, we on our profile, we look at the coordinates and then we do like this little measurement thing. It's kind of hard to explain when I'm not showing you, but we could locate where that spike was. So we could say like, okay, on this profile, the majority of our tension spikes were on the top end or the bottom end. So then later on, if we wanted to go back, and that happened quite often, we would find a place that was incredibly unique and cool, and we wanted to go back and get more of those types of rocks. We can go, okay, let's go back to the bottom part. Like, let's go further down, let's go further top.
You could dial it in.
Mm-hmm. And labeling, when we put these all away, we had bags that we could label, and then we also had these rock boxes you can see underneath here. That's where we stored them, and then we put them down in the storage room on the ship. But labeling was incredibly important. If you didn't label something, if you got the dredges mixed up, so we would only do like one dredge at a time laid out like this, because if you mix them up, if you label something wrong, it's useless. Because then you don't know where it came from, and if you have the wrong type of lithology in a different dredge that doesn't have that type of lithology, it will throw off everything. So labeling was incredibly important. That's why a lot of times we would write on the paper next to the rock, like, okay, so this is this group, this is part of this dredge, and all that. And the bags that we labeled like 3 times. We would put like a little note in, and then we'd label the small bag, then we'd label the big bag, and then we labeled the box. It's incredibly important. So that's what it looked like when I had everything all laid out. These rocks right here are beautiful, and they are special, and they're my favorite. This picture on here isn't showing it super well, but these types of rocks are called xenoliths, or if you're from France, xenolite. And those are mostly all made of specific types of mineral crystals. So if you can see like the green and the black in there, the crystals there, that's olivine, pyroxenes, and amphiboles. And those, again, specific type of mineral can tell you specific kinds of things about the magma that created those rocks. And these are directly from the mantle. So if you get a xenolith in a sample of other volcanic rocks, that tells you that this material came directly from the mantle straight up. So it didn't change its composition as it was coming up. It came directly from the mantle. And so for our specific science, that's incredibly important to find. And that was uniform throughout the area that we were studying, which was great news for us. Those are actually quite large. Let me see. This one right here is about like this big.
Okay.
So very large, which is actually not very common to find. So if you can find a very large xenolith, that's incredible. A lot of the other ones that we found throughout the area were much, much smaller, or just itty bitty that you would find in a rock. So finding them this big was super exciting. We got all giddy, and that picture you saw of me with my big grin on, that's where those came from. Those were from Squid Ridge, and that's the only spot that we found some that big. And here I am. These are some photos of me sitting there. We wouldn't always get very big rock samples. Some of them were very, very small, and that's why we needed the sieve, so we could keep all of this, because to me, everything is valuable. You don't want to just like, oh, I don't need this, because we kept this, and we found out that there were individual minerals. So they weren't like incorporated in the rock, they were brought out of the rock and they were just there. So I spent a lot of my time sitting here doing that. So what I'm doing is I'm picking out individual little mineral crystals and I'm putting them in that petri dish.
So you're harvesting gold.
Pretty much, to me, yes. The olivine, which is, olivine, I don't know if anybody knows that mineral. It's also epidote, which is a gem crystal, the birthstone of August, which is my birthstone. It's one of my favorite minerals. So we found gobs and gobs of it, which is absolutely fantastic for our science. And it saved me a lot of time once I got back to BG, and I didn't have to crush them up and pick through those here. So it's just some more pictures of me. It was very soothing, actually. After a while,
Especially if you're eating ice cream.
yes. Ice cream was our emotional support food to lift us up during the day. Everyone ate ice cream. Someone would go to the little freezer in the galley and be like, guys, there's ice cream. And then everyone would go get ice cream. And also, like, they were in, like, the packages. It was a certain brand from New Zealand, and it was so good. And you could hear, like, the wrappers, like, opening up. And then you, like, whip around in the lab room and go, is that ice cream? So it became very relaxing, at least for me, to do this. And towards the end of the cruise, when we got some more of this type of samples, we got other people coming into the lab room, like some crew members, some of the other scientists. They would come in and do this. And they were like, oh, this is so fun. This is so soothing. They would just sit there, like we'd sit there for hours and do this.
Eating the ice cream or?
Sometimes.
Did you bring all that stuff back?
We brought it all back. We brought
Is
it
it
all
at
back.
the school then?
It is at the school. We have a lab room in the back of Overman, and the entire wall is covered in our wooden boxes. We have them numbered, but it is like, okay, wait, where are we? We brought back everything, almost everything. Towards the end of the trip, we started running out of box space. So in the beginning, our first couple dredges were like, let's keep it all. We gotta keep it all. And then towards the end, when we started running out of storage space, and we were only allowed a certain amount of pallet space in the boat, we had to, unfortunately, throw some rocks overboard, which broke our hearts, but we had to do it. Here I am, cutting some rocks. So we had 2 rock saws on the ship, and the room that I'm in, I did not have a picture of the room itself. So I'm sorry earlier when I was showing the pictures. This is called the aquarium room. It was basically just a giant sink. So when the weather got too cold to use the hose outside, we would clean our rocks in here. Unfortunately, we couldn't just dump a bunch of sediment down there because it would clog the draining pipes. So we would have to do it just in 5-gallon buckets and then dump it outside. But here we could just use the hoses, use the rock saws, which had to be hooked up to hoses so that you don't get silica dust all over the place, and that's how you get cancer. And lung disease. So I am wearing mask, eye protection, and ear protection. So here we are cutting rocks. We would do this quite often when we found a cool rock that we're like, I want to know what's inside this. Because that's how you don't just look at the rock and like, oh, yeah, that's a rock. We gotta crack it open. So a lot of times we would take it down to the rock saw and we would saw it open. And a lot of times we got surprises when we opened up the rock. We're like, oh, didn't think that was gonna be inside of it. A lot of times we would also just use a hammer. They had like a really big hammer that we would also smash. Me and Carol got smash happy sometimes, and we just go out there and just smash rocks.
That was
For important,
therapeutic too.
for important reasons.
Katie, when you dumped the rocks back in, did you have to dump at the same place you dredged?
No.
Was that messed up other people?
Yes and no. So I was also confused on that. That is something I questioned as well. So Antarctica has, of course, the Antarctic Treaty, which is laws and rules that you have to follow while you're down there, because the majority of the time, historically, you only went down there for science. If anything was dropped in the ocean, whether it was something sciencey or not, you had to report its location, so its coordinates and what it was, and there was someone on board whose job that was to record all that stuff. So if we dumped something, water and whatnot, not so much, especially if it was just sediment water, not so much, because in this area the sediment is basically all the same. Or if it was what we call an IRD, which is an erratic, all these terms. So it's basically a piece of rock that came from the continent, was incorporated into a glacier, carried with the glacier until it was dropped. So an ice rafted deposit is an IRD. And those rocks we don't need. Someone else maybe wanted that for science, but that was not our purpose. So if we dropped one of those, it wasn't a big deal because they were everywhere. But one of our scientists dropped her phone in the ocean. So it was a very sad day, and she was our head scientist. So a lot of people needed to get a hold of her. So she thought it was okay towards the end. She's like, actually, it was kind of nice not to have my phone, but also very frustrating. So she did have to report where it was dropped, what it was, and all that stuff. There's another operation that I'm not going to talk about in here, but it's called an XBT. I do not know what that stands for. I just know that they were called XBTs. And they were used, these little pods that are shot into the ocean, and then the computer picks up the readings from the little pod that you shot into the ocean. And it gathered information like heat flow, temperature, salinity, and whatnot from the water column and the seafloor. But you just left the pods on the bottom of the ocean. I didn't understand it. I asked that several times. I'm like, but why? But of course, because it's an operation, we know exactly where it dropped. So we already have that information. So they already know it's there. I mean, it's a common operation that scientists use, so I'm sure there's XBT shells all over the place down there.
You didn't pick any up in your dredge though?
No, we did not. No. There were a lot of duds. They were extremely hard to operate because they have this little tiny copper fiber wire that you drop into the ocean and then you cut it. But if it didn't launch right, if the wire didn't snap or anything like that, it was a dud. So they were very hard to actually get them to actually operate the way they were supposed to.
Before you go to the next slide, can you talk about the rock cutter?
Yeah.
Why she's got her hand 45 degrees?
Yeah, I know.
So honestly, it took me a long time to get this comfortable. was reassured, like, it's okay, you can get your hands super close. And I'd be like, I'm only doing the big rocks, don't give me the little rocks. And then by the end of the cruise, I'm like, give me the little rock. It is a diamond-based blade. So it will cut an extremely dense, igneous rock, but it will not cut your finger. So you could touch it. Now I don't really suggest, like, you'll get a burn if you keep your finger on it. You'll get burned, but it won't cut you. But also notice that I don't have gloves on. That's another safety precaution. Don't wear gloves because then if your glove gets caught underneath the blade, your hand will also go with it. And you had to constantly run the water, like I said, to keep the dust down. It was very cold water. Extremely cold water. This room was not heated at all. It was extremely cold. So not only was the room cold, the water was also cold. So my hands were always just shaky, freezy. So yes, that was a big part of our operations with the rock prep. We also prepped a lot of rocks, so we would cut little, we would cut little tiny squares out of the rocks, like this big, and that's what we sent out to the labs for geochemistry and section creations. So I would, out of like these big rocks, I would cut tiny little squares out of it. I became a pro. At first I was terrified to do it, but I became a pro at it. And this is an extremely nice rock saw. The one we have at the university is not this nice. The blade goes out of alignment all the time. It takes forever to cut one rock. It's not fun. I was like, Kurt, can we have our rock saw from the NBP back, please? So our other operation that we did is a toe cam. So my science group from BGSU was partnering with and co-doing all the science with from WHOI, Woods Hole Oceanic Institute in Massachusetts. And so a lot of the scientists came from there, but also our engineers and technicians, which without them, we would not be able to do anything. I learned a whole new realm of science and the science world and ship life and all of that. I have a whole new level of respect for technicians and engineers because without them, we got nothing. So this is our toe cam. So our WHOI MISO engineers created this. They built this themselves. Was their baby. So those computers that I showed you in the winch control room, this is what they operated. So there are like I could not tell you, there were 4 different kinds of cameras. You had to have a specific kind of weight that it would sink enough in the ocean floor, but not hit the ocean floor. It also had a fiber cable and then also the winch cable. It also had on it, so it had 4 cameras. It had also on the fin, there's a magnetometer and gravitometer, and that gave us magnetics and gravity information, which tells you basically like the density of what you're looking at. Those were just on there just for more information. It was opportunity. And then these orange things that are around there, those are batteries. They were very, very heavy. I got to carry those down some stairs. It was not fun. Very, very heavy. So yeah, all the weights and everything. And it had, one camera was live footage. So we got a video of while it was down there and along the formations that we were trying to look at. And then there was a camera that did still shots, so just every like 2 seconds it would take pictures. And then there was one picture that faced forward so that the operators could see where they were going. And lots of different angled lights and all that. I couldn't tell you half of what was on there. So many bells and whistles. So at the forward dry lab at the watch station, on all of those computer screens, we would sit there and we would watch the live footage and the still shots while our technicians and engineers were in the control room operating it. We would sit back here and we'd watch it and we'd hand log anything interesting we saw. Most of it was actually biology, ironically. We'd be like, oh look, there was a bunch of starfish. Oh look, there was some corals. Oh look, there was a fish. because along the flat tops, which is what we mainly used this for, it was boring. These were like 4-hour dives. So it got kind of boring really fast, so we'd be like, oh look, a starfish! Until it was kind of like same old look, until we got to the Feather Top seamound. That seamound, it's a flat top seamound, but it also has a volcanic ridge that juts off of it. That became a very hot topic of our research once we figured all of that out. Because we found the bathymetry, we mapped it, we're like, what is this thing sticking off of it? And I'm looking at the bathymetry, I'm like, it looks like a feather, hence Feather Top. I got to name that one too. So once we got to that seamound, we were doing a dive for one of the tow cams, and we were doing it along this ridge, and it was something completely new that we did not see. There were ridges, there were towers, there were ledges. Like we were going up, we could see there was a crack along the top of it. There was lots and lots of vegetation on it, which was unusual. We hadn't seen any of this type of vegetation or anything like that on any of the other seamounts. So we're like, but why? That's again science, like, but why? So then we got, this was fun with the other scientists, some of the other scientists on board were like, because we were starting to think like, okay, this has to be younger volcanism, because we got samples from it. It was very, what we say, friable, so it was basically just very fresh volcanic ash, coarse, dense volcanic ash. And so we're like, well, this has to be young. I wonder if maybe there's a thermal anomaly here. So some of the other scientists that did an operation called CTD, which is this big rim of tanks that collect water samples throughout the water column as it goes down, and it records the temperature, salinity, and its temperature throughout the water column. And so they decided like, hey, can we send this down and see if there's a thermal anomaly? So like, absolutely. So they sent one of those down, and it was one of the only places we found extreme high temperatures. So we were very excited about that. So that was one of the more exciting dives. Other dives were not that exciting.
How high a temperature was it?
They measured it in odd unit that I do not know. So it was
Above freezing?
above freezing, yeah. So it was actually hot, but I couldn't tell you because it was like 100 something. But they used a unit that I do not know. I just trusted that it's hot. So here's a different angle and look of what it is. So the screen on the far right, that is our live footage. So we just watched that and watched the tow cam kind of just move along. And then the middle one is the still shots. And it was all kind of, we always had this laptop was connected to like everything. But the laptop that I'm currently touching in that picture, we had our QGIS map up, and I would take screenshots. So when we found something interesting that we wanted to document, I would take a screenshot of both of those screens, along with a screenshot of that laptop, so we could see our coordinates. So we could go back, we're like, okay, this was cool, but where was it? So I would sit there and be like, oh, that's cool, and I'd take a screenshot. And again, these dives were 4 to 5 hours long.
Is that the vegetation?
Yeah, that is. Look, there's some rocks there, but there's some corals. There were some odd-looking corals and vegetation and biology. And there's a specific kind of animal that I'll show you later we saw a lot of. Other than sea stars, there were a lot of feather stars, starfish, bottom-feeding fish, stuff like that. And so then our other operation, I'm going to go back just a second. So with the tow cam, it was called a tow cam, because you put it in the water and it goes down to a certain depth on your profile. We create another profile, and then the ship would just tow it. It would drag it along that profile. And of course the fin on there was help keep it balanced and keep it on that profile. as best as we could according to the weather conditions. But eventually, when conditions got so bad that the wind was blowing, there was a lot of ice, we started calling it a drift cam because we would find the direction of the wind and then we create our profile according to that direction, and the ship would not move, it would just drift. It would drift in that direction and it would take the tow cam with it, so we started calling it a drift cam. So you probably heard me talk a lot about bathymetry and seafloor imagery. So this was the specific kind of program we used. It was called multi-beam bathymetry. Multi-beam meaning that it had a large swath. So it was wide. There were multiple beams. And the easiest way to explain it, without going into a large depth in physics and half of what I don't even understand, it's basically echolocation with sonar beams. And multi-beam uses multiple beams rather than one, which is other programs that you can use. But this is much more higher quality of data. There's a better grid system, a better resolution system. So that's what we use because we really, a lot of our science depended upon our mapping, the majority, because it's under the water, you can't just look at it, which a lot of times I'm like, someone needs to invent a suit that we can just put on and go down there, because it was definitely hard to do. I had no idea going into this how hard oceanography could be. So we are really reliant on this mapping, on these multi-beam maps. So that's kind of how it worked. It had a swath, so they would go back and forth, up and down to the ship. And then according to the elevation of what the sonar beams were hitting, that's how you get your map and your data. And so those two computer screens there, or TV screens, showed us the actual program itself. So I'd have to check that and make sure that we were actually picking up data, that it was actually working, the beams were actually hitting the seafloor. And then here, this showed our swath, and I just had to make sure that that was following the right path and that it was actually picking up something. And then up there, that screen that I showed you earlier, if it wasn't within range of the depth of the water on the seafloor, we would have to go over there and we would have to go and manually change that depth, like I said earlier. But we also had a system that was similar to multi-beam. It was called a chirp. And it wasn't used so much for imagery and mapping. It was mostly used to see what you were penetrating. Is it mostly sediment here? Is it mostly rock here? I didn't understand too much on what it did exactly, but it was one of my jobs to go every hour over to that computer screen and start a new line. Every hour we started a new line for the chirp. The coring group mostly used that, but it was one of my jobs to go and restart a line every hour. So here's a larger map of what our bathymetry looked like as we were actually doing it. So the bridge also had this screen, and they would follow along the path. We're like, okay, we call them waypoints, so we had little points that the ship would bounce back and forth between and map the seafloor. So we would look at that. We had our depth and our water column there. And when we got all of our data, we would put it into a GIS program, and we would get a map. And this is what it looks like. This is what it looks like when it is dirty. So if you heard me say I clean bathymetry, this is what I mean. So we would get a lot of noise. And in terms of, data and computer stuff, noise is extra data that you don't want. So it would pick up extra things in the water column that it didn't need to. And so all that black stuff is extra noise. So what I would have to do, which is 60% of what I did on this ship, I would have to go to this program. I would select a little section. If you can see that yellow square there, I would select a section, and then it would come up in a new window, and then it would show me that section of the seafloor. And I would have to go in and manually get rid of all of the noise. That's what it looks like when it's clean, okay? This is not like vertically exaggerated. If I pulled this out more, you would see more of like the topography of the seafloor. This is pretty flat, but this is what it looks like when it's clean. This is what it looks like when it's dirty. So I would have to go in all this extra color stuff, all these what we call smileys. I would have to go in and manually clean out. So I would go in there with a little mouse and I would erase it all. So yes, little baby master student, that was our task. And we mapped a lot, so I did this for hours and hours. Once I got in the zone, it's really not that bad. Once I got in the zone, I popped in an audiobook, I was set. There I am, sitting there, putting up the imagery. There I am again, sitting and putting up the imagery. Over and over and over again. So now kind of out of science and more just into Antarctica itself. When I first went down, of course, it was fallish in the southern hemisphere, and then when I left, it was turning into winter. So temperature-wise, when I was down there in the beginning, it was around 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Just around there, about 20s. So when I was like, I'm from Midwest Ohio, this ain't nothing. This is what I'm used to. I just got out of this weather. I was pretty comfortable. It was cold, but it was a comfortable cold, and I was expecting it to be worse. I was like, this is fine. I can handle this. And then it turned more into the end of March and April, and it got into the negatives and got very, very windy. So it got, I think the coldest it got was about -50. It was about the coldest. Our outside barometer broke. So we did see quite a few animals, not a large variety, but it was always very cool to see. We got to see some seals, especially towards the beginning of the trip. They kind of started disappearing towards the end when weather conditions kind of got worse. So there were, I couldn't tell you, there were leopard seals, and then there were these other kind of adorable little seals. And they would just flop there on sheets of ice, and they'd just lay there and sunbathe. There were quite a few birds. Just a warning, some of these pictures I did not take. So there were albatross, which were these two pictures here, which was also growing up with Eldon Martin. These were some of the birds I've always wanted to see. So I was kind of like, it's an albatross! And then that is a snow petrel, and we saw snow petrels most of the time. That was the bird that you saw the majority of the time. And of course, this was when we were closer to land. So the area that we were studying, it was a very large area, but I could see the continent the majority of the time. We were that close. So when there were times we were closer to the continent than others, you would see an increase in birds. Now this is the animal that we saw a lot of on our tow cam. This is a sea pig. It is a type of sea cucumber, and our biologist group, the operation that they did SLED, which they would take like this, I don't even know how to show it, I did have a picture of it, but they would take this sled-looking thing along the bottom of the ocean, and they'd stir up the mud, and then they'd get those little tiny organisms they wanted caught in a net, in a micro net. But they would catch other things as well. And sea pigs was one of them. And so this one particular time, they had gotten one, and they were making a video about it. We're like, oh, they got a sea pig, and one other scientist got to see it. We're all like, what is this thing you're talking about? So then they got like a whole bucket full of them the next time. And they're like, okay, everybody, come see what a sea pig is. And so I went in, and I got all geeked up about it, because they're freaking weird and adorable at the same time. They're literally just like, it feels like holding a water balloon. They do have the little like antenna. They have 4 antennas that stick up, and that's like their eyes, their sensory eyes. And then they have a little mouth that they're bottom feeders, and they just kind of like, they're not fast, they're pretty slow. They're sea cucumbers. But you can see how excited I got to hold one. Sea pigs also became kind of like a joke throughout the ship. Like, are there more sea pigs? That's a little bit more of a closer up. Let's see the little feet. This is the little mouth right there. An interesting fact that if they get stressed out, they excrete their innards. They grow them back, but they do just kind of squirt their intestines and all of that stuff. If you look up an image of them, they will not look like this. So these were specific to Antarctica, but also they kind of like inflate when they're out of water. So because of their different temperature and pressure conditions, they kind of change their look a little bit. So the longer they were out of water, the more squishy they got. They kind of deflated. They did throw these back. They didn't keep them, they didn't dissect them, they did throw these back. So they lived. One of the greatest things, one of my favorite things of being in Antarctica was seeing all the penguins. So of course we were promised, we're like, oh, you guys you'll see plenty of penguins. You'll see penguins, you'll see penguins. For a while we did not see any penguins. And because of shifts and times that some people were awake, some people weren't, there was one giant group chat in WhatsApp for everyone on the ship. And so you'd get pictures, people just throwing in pictures in the group chat, like, penguins on the starboard side. And then everyone would rush outside to see the penguins. Or if you were asleep, you'd wake up like, aw, I missed the penguins. There were two types of penguins that we saw. These specifics are called Adelie penguins, and they're about like 2 feet tall. And so I called them the little penguins. But they did not like to be seen. They didn't like to be approached. And so you see them, all the pictures are of them running away. They like to run away. I called them little ninja penguins because they would run away with their wings behind them. They were so funny to watch. One time I was staring out the porthole in the forward dry lab, and I had binoculars on, as one does. And I found a group of Adelies out in the distance. There were like 17 of them, which was kind of odd to see that many. But they were so funny. They were hopping around, they were sliding on their bellies, they were having a grand old time away from the ship. And there was a pool of water in front of them, and they would like, literally super cartoony, they would like diver girl formation into the water. So it was like they'd line up and just like boom, 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 boom. And then they would come out of the water in a line, and they'd like boom, 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 and then they'd waddle away, break up, run around, go back, and dive back in the water. And they were super entertaining to watch. If you could spot them, they were very hard to spot because they would run away. But the emperor penguins are what you saw most of the time, and they were around towards the end, in the middle of the trip. They were everywhere, all day, every day. Now, I was lucky enough to be mostly on the day shift, so it was much easier for me to see the penguins. My fellow classmate that was with me and my friend, she hardly ever saw the penguins because she was mostly on the night shift, and she had like 4 hours maybe of daylight, maybe. So she's like, I hardly ever saw the penguins, but I saw penguins every day, all day, and it was a dream. So these penguins, the specific picture I took, and these penguins were like right off the bow of the ship. I went off to the bow, and they were just right there. They were just right there. Now, of course, I'm up on the ship, so I had to like zoom in, but they were super close. The emperor penguins loved being next to the ship. They didn't mind. They showed off. They swim up and they hop on the ice and they just stand there looking all pretty. And of course, when the ice came in more and we had like total sheets, and the ship would break up the ice, they would follow the ship. So you found them a lot in the back of the ship because you broke up the ice and they had fresh water to swim around and get food in. So there were larger groups. Towards the end, you found larger groups of penguins following the ship. These emperor penguins are maybe like 3 to 4 feet tall, so not much shorter than me. They're about my size. But of course, standing up on the ship and look at them, they look kind of small, but they're quite large birds. And the sound that they make, I would say, if you know what a loon sounds like, and a goose, it's kind of mixture between those two birds. There was a lot of people on board that we we kept trying to like mimic them. Do not ask me to do that. They were very interesting to watch swim. Also very cartoony that you could see them in the water and they would just like jet stream across. One time, the first couple sightings of a group of emperor penguins, they were like in the back of the ship, and then they swim, and they were in front of the ship, and the side of the ship, and the other side, and we were like trying to like follow them. It failed a lot of time. Like, where are they? No, they're up there. So you could see like the jet of water as they were like swimming across, but also in the water, and they would like surface and just poke their head out. They just look like ducks. they don't look super unique in the water. You're just like, oh, it's a giant duck, okay. And then they would jump up on the ice and they'd look all pretty like that. Here's some more. There's one over there getting out of the water. Now, some people brought down with them like super nice, expensive cameras. I just had my phone camera. That was kind of busted up. So some of these pictures are a little blurry, but I did incorporate. So this picture here, a friend of mine took.
Are those emperor?
And these are emperor penguins. You can tell with like the yellow chin strap. Hold it. There I am. There's proof that I saw them. I did take some of these photos. I was there. In the back you can see, I'll talk a little bit later, probably the next slide, about ice change. You can see that there's sheet ice right now, and it was very bright. So you had to wear goggles or like sunglasses if you wanted to see anything outside. You'd walk outside and go, oh, no, I can't see anything. So you'd have to run back in and grab your sunglasses. I took these pictures.
That's cool.
I was going to say, would you fair actions?
Yes, exactly.
Yep, action shot there. Okay, yeah, so ice change. Something I was not prepared for, no one told me. A lot of people did know this about Antarctica, but the ice does not stay the same. Now, when you think of Antarctica or somewhere cold, you think of just the plain old big ice sheet, one giant ice sheet. It's not like that at all. So when we first went down there early in the season, the ice, oh wait, okay, here. This is my first iceberg. So there's no ice, there's just icebergs floating around. So this is when we had just crossed 66 degrees longitude, and so we were officially in the polar circle. And we started to see an iceberg, and I was super excited. See your first iceberg. And then when we left, we're like, oh, it's another iceberg. There's definitely some unique looking icebergs too. So when we first went down early in the season, the ice was very small. This is what it looked like. And they called this pancake ice. So there's just tiny little discs. Now, from the ship, I can't really tell you how big. They look really small to me, but they were probably like this big. So you could just plow right through this. It was just little pancakes just swimming across there. It was very weird to see the water all of a sudden, because you can see out by that iceberg back there, that's open ocean. And then you get pancake ice. It was all very sudden. It was like open ocean, pancake ice. Open ocean, iceberg, pancake ice. Until it got cold enough where that's all you saw was pancake ice. Here's a little more close up. So as the season went on and it got colder, these pancakes, they grow and they connect together. I did have a video, but I couldn't get it onto the slide. This isn't exactly, it is pancake ice, but it's also just frozen water. So just the surface of the water was frozen. And it looked like you just took a giant sheet and you laid it on the water, and it was just like moving. So there were no wave crests or that weird texture that you see on water. It was just smooth and it was just flowing. It was so cool to watch. And then the ice, the pancakes got larger and they connect together, and I call this scalloped potato ice. So they start stacking on top of each other. I think what they call it, like the people who do this a lot on the ship, crew and the captain, they call it cake ice because it goes from pancake to cake. I prefer scalloped potato ice.
About what month is that?
This is probably in February. Yeah. It changes pretty quickly. Temperatures change pretty quickly. And then as it gets colder and more into March, it also depended on where in the region we were traveling. In that area, the ice usually comes from the east up to the northwest. So if we were kind of in the northwest area, there wasn't as much ice and it didn't change as drastically, but then when we went down, it did. So you'd be in one area that is not a lot of ice, maybe some open water, maybe just some large chunks, some icebergs. You go to another area, complete ice. You can't even go in there. So then when it gets colder, this is probably more in the middle of March, probably beginning of March, it gets, the pancakes and the scalloped potatoes grow and they go into these very, very large patches of ice. And then it just keeps growing from there. So these are just some pictures of the ice itself. So again, some areas it would look like this, other areas, pancake ice. And then, of course, eventually, when it got more towards winter, at the end of the season, kind of mid-March to April, this is what it looked like. So it just sheets. It would also snow a lot. It was usually always very cloudy and snowy, and the wind picked up quite a bit, and it changed direction maybe every half hour, maybe even every 10 minutes. It was very challenging. So when the ice gets like this, some operations are just almost impossible to do. So dredges, again, were one of those more easier operations to do, and so we did plan ahead that dredging would be one of the last things we do. So a lot of our time was towards the end of the cruise, and that was an extremely tiring time because we called it a dredge marathon. It was just dredge after dredge after dredge. I saw a hand, yeah?
Yeah, Katie, I have a couple of practical questions. Throughout 90 to 100 days,
Yeah.
does the ship refuel?
So, no, it doesn't refuel. It holds all of the fuel. So they did have to. Now this ship takes this exact trip, several times a year. So from New Zealand to Antarctica, maybe not this specific sea, the Ross Sea is where we were, but it does take this trip like several times a year. So they know exactly how much fuel they need. Now the bad variable is you have excited scientists on board, and they want to go everywhere, and they want to go back to places. So there were some moments where, towards the end of the ship, where the captain has to make sure that there's enough fuel to get back to New Zealand, where you have to take into consideration how much fuel it's going to take to plow through the ice. So there were areas where the ice came in so thick and fast that we could not go back to. So over in the area where the Flapjack Field was and Squid Ridge was, we could not go back there. We wanted to go back there very badly, but we could not because the ice came in so fast and thick. And we did go over to where Mount Erebus is, and that also came in really fast and quick. So we got down there almost immediately where we knew like there would be just open water. So we did that as fast as possible, and it did come in pretty fast. So yes, they did have to make sure that there was enough fuel to get back to New Zealand. So there were times where it's like, no, we're not going back there. We need to save up fuel.
Next question, practical. 65 people, 90 days, cut fingers sometimes. Is there anybody medical on that ship?
Yes, there was. So our lovely marine techs and some of the IT people actually doubled as our medical team. So they were qualified and certified to take care of things medically, but there was not a doctor. So there was only just like EMTs kind of people there that doubled up as MTs and ITs or ETs. So if Mr. Kinninger, you would know this better than anybody, but I had to go through a lot of medical things to even qualify to go on this trip. I had to get a lot of extra shots, examinations, all this stuff that was just took a large toll and a big time, a lot of my time before I actually went on this trip. it was a little overwhelming, all the stuff that they made you do, but it does make sense what they make you do, just because there is not a doctor on board. So yeah, there was a lot of medical things that everybody had to go through. Everybody had to go through the same thing. Unfortunately, one of my classmates that was going to go down with us could not go because he did not pass his medical stuff. So that was kind of a bummer. There were some other people. Unfortunately, there were supposed to be a lot more people on board, but they couldn't because they didn't pass their medicals. So they call it physical qualification, so PQ. So they were NPQ, so negative qualification. Yeah, it was not fun, but they did have some medical people there just in case. And honestly, it was a big blessing that no one got majorly hurt. There were no major injuries. There were a few like cuts. One of the people in the pouring group, they cut their finger, but that was like the most major thing. And some sponge spicules that were lodged in odd places. My professor got one like on his nose. Yeah. And someone also got like one lodged under their fingernail. Yeah, that was not. It wasn't me, but it did not look fun. One of the most beautiful things that was just absolutely stunning and just awe-inspiring, and I just sat there for hours just like, oh my gosh, God is amazing, were sunsets. You think of the Antarctic landscape as just white and blue and gray. The best time of day was sunrises and sunsets. Now this was, because of my shift, I only ever saw the sunsets. And that was like the highlight of our day because we forced ourselves to go outside or up to the bridge. Sometimes I had to remind myself that it wasn't all about work and I needed to go outside. So sunsets were absolutely incredible. I have some more sunset pictures later, but some more pictures of ice. This is an ice ridge. So when you get the sheet ice, you have sheets of ice, but they're still in large patches. And because of the way the water moves, they run into each other and they grind against each other. So you get these pressure ridges. So you get just like chunks of ice sitting there. And I thought this was absolutely beautiful to watch as well. When we went into areas of lots of broken up ice.
Can you see the ice move, or is it just so slow?
You can, which is a weird sensation when your ship is not moving and you're outside. But it looks like you are moving because the ice is moving all around you. It was an odd optical illusion because sometimes we'd be sitting there and you're doing an operation and you know you are stationary. You're looking at the monitor, you know you are not moving. But everything else is moving around you. It's an odd sensation. Here's some sunsets. They don't look too good on the TV, but this is one of my favorite pictures.
Those mountains are all ice.
Yeah, actually you can see. So these are icebergs, very large icebergs, but you can actually see the continent in the background. That is the continent. So where we were, those are the Trans-Antarctic Mountains. So it's a very large mountain range that's in Antarctica, and that's part of the rift system. It's also one of my favorites. You can see the pressure ridges. It's very yeah, here's the mountains.
Did you get close to them?
A lot of these pictures are very zoomed in, but you could see them with the naked eye. Yeah. A lot of times we would go up to the bridge and we'd use binoculars. They always had binoculars up there, and you could look out and you could see the mountains much better. But again, like the better ones of the mountains were taken by other people because they have fancy cameras. It's a weird iceberg with the pancake ice. And here's one of the, specifically this, this is an ice wall. So this was extremely thick. Now we're pretty far away from this, but if you could see this with the naked eye, and we were relatively close. We were a couple kilometers away, but this is extremely tall. and it was really cool. If you look at this with like binoculars, you can see like little cracks and caves and these huge icicles hanging down. It was absolutely beautiful. Some of these things you look at and like, oh my gosh, that's beautiful, but I promise you it was even more spectacular in person. Pictures don't do it justice. Some more of the mountains. And of course, it was always very windy, so if you looked on land, you could always see these big swarms of snow moving around. Some more proof I was there. And now this picture, yes, I look extremely excited, but you can't see what I'm excited about because it's extremely cloudy out. So I am right in front of Mount Erebus. Mount Erebus is in the background, and I was super excited. You couldn't see it because the clouds were super low. It was a very gloomy day. But there it is. That's it.
So that's on the continent.
That's on the continent. Yep, that's on Ross Island, Mount Erebus. And in front of it, that is Beaufort Island. So we were, early in the trip, we wanted to do a little bit of science over in this area before the ice came in. So we went kind of over there immediately, and we got up like really close to this island. And it was super pretty. So there's Mount Erebus, Beaufort Island. Over there, that is Mount Bird, and over on the side you can't see is Mount Terror.
Is Mount Erebus the largest one?
And in this area, yeah, and most surfaced. So you can see most of it. There's some more. Again, this was like a dream come true to see this volcano in real life.
You said that one's active.
This is active, yes. There were times where it was smoking while we were there. You could see the smoke coming up through it. This is Franklin Island, so this was kind of up a little bit more. It's a lot more flat than Beaufort. There's Beaufort. Here I am, Beaufort Island at a different angle. What I'm wearing is what we call a big red, but it's just like the big standard parka that they give you. They gave us 2 separate bags full of warm weather gear. So ECW is what we mainly wore. It's extreme cold weather. That equipment was more for continental work. So I didn't wear a lot of that except for like the big parka. But we also got PEE, which was more for ship life, which there were more like much warmer things and things that we could use to get wet. More like rubber-based things.
Could you keep them?
We could not keep them, no. These were issued to us and we had to give them back. It was very sad, but... now, some more of like the fun aspects. I worked very hard. It was sometimes just very exhausting. I'd be staring at the bathymetry for hours upon hours, or staring at rocks upon hours. And I would remind myself like, oh yeah, I'm in a cool place on Earth. I should go outside. But it wasn't always work, and it was very nice. It was a big blessing that we all got along. And so we would do some fun things, and we spent, of course, 3 months, so there were quite a few holidays that we got to spend together. So Valentine's Day, St. Patty's Day, Mardi Gras, April Fool's Day, all of those we got to share together. So on St. Patty's Day, we all gathered in the galley and we made liquid nitrogen ice cream. If you can tell, we were all scientists. I'm not in this picture, but I did get to mix up the ice cream. And there I am with my professor eating our green ice cream. I said earlier at the beginning that about 2 or 3 o'clock it would be like tea time and snack time. Well, there was also coffee time, which was pretty much every hour of the day. I didn't drink so much coffee, but there were some people on board that brought, like they bought in New Zealand and brought with them pounds, plural, of coffee to last them the entire time. And it was very fun because they would like share flavors, and there was a time like, I'm making coffee, do you want some? So there's 2 of the people who drank the most coffee on board.
Did you get resupplied anytime during the trip? Or
No, we did not get resupplied. So for food, they did stock all the food for all 3 months at one time. Now you did notice when we first went down and we were in transit and we were first there for like the first couple weeks, we we got very fresh foods. We got lettuce, and we got fruits, and we got all this stuff. And then it turned into canned things, canned vegetables, canned fruit, and all that kind of stuff. The cooks were actually very good. They were very nice people, and they were fantastic cooks. But they also utilized leftover things. So if there were some leftover things, they would cook them in a different kind of dish, which you could tell you ate it like, I ate this earlier this week. or they would turn, if they had some extra fruit or something, they turned them into like a bread or a pie or something like that. We were never short on food, no. Sometimes I think we were fed too well, for sure.
Who's
Too
your
much food.
professor?
That is Kurt Panter.
Say that again?
Kurt Panter. Yes, there were just some more fun moments. Yes, cabin fever is maybe a little bit of a thing. We did get a little restless at times, especially if it wasn't our days to do science. Of course, it was always work to do, but we had fun with it. It was a very fun time. It wasn't always serious. One of the things that we got a little stir crazy about was we printed out this very large map of the area and things we had already mapped and everything, and that was mostly for science purposes, so we could lay everything out without staring at the QGIS form that had like a million layers on it. So we just lay it all at one point. We could label things, we could draw on it, write on it, whatever. But I started with the biologists. They started it, it's their fault. They came in and they decided they were gonna make a little thing for their sled. So right there's a 3D printed sea pig. And then their sled. And then we decided well, we can't let them win. We gotta do it too. So whatever we could find on board, which it was not supplied with craft items, so we just found whatever we could. And we made, me and a friend, we made the tow cam and we made a dredge with a little rock inside of it. Someone printed out the ship and we moved it like to wherever we were. And then someone made a bigger ship with like battery operated lights and everything. It went crazy. Everyone started making it. And then the heat flow probes there. And then the coring group made like all the core. Then we made little figurines of all the MTs. Yeah, it got crazy. And then we had gummy bears and penguins and sea pigs taking over. And I said we need to play a game of Frisk. There's a picture of us on Mardi Gras. Yeah. And there I am holding a worm centipede thing. And it was always fun to pick up the weird animals and be like, okay, what is this? Kevin! Yes, there were lots of smiles. Now this picture specifically is funny. Of course, it was one of those you had to be there in the moment. But one of the operations I forgot to put in here, it was called a Smith Mac. And it was an operation that they don't ever do. It had been sitting on the ship for about 15 years without use. And basically what it is, it's a giant claw that they send into the ocean. It's closed, and when they set it down, there's springs that release it, and then when you bring it up, it scoops up. And it's mainly for picking up sediments. So for the people that were doing bacteria, they wanted to do it just for them. It was basically the MTs just going like, I really want to use the machinery. Can we please use it? And so they're like, okay, what scientists? They have to have a reason to use it. So the people with the bacteria were like, okay, fine, we'll do it. So it was mainly for them, but it ended up being more of a rock person thing because you would just pull up mud and maybe there was one rock in it. So we would go out, me and Carol would like get all dressed up in our stuff, which takes a while, and then we'd go out there and we'd dig through the mud and find the one pebble in the entire thing, because the biologists and the bacteria people stopped coming out. They're like, this isn't worth it, we're just not gonna do it. But the MTs wanted to keep doing it, so I was like, you do it, I'll come outside. So this is just like, that's all we got out of the big scoop. So this was from the last one that we did. We did 8 in total. And it was just kind of randomly sporadic. They're like, let's do a Smith Mac. They got very excited about it, and we fed off of that energy, so it was pretty exciting. Here's just some more pictures of me. And yes, I like my rocks. That's That's me in the engine room. And now finally, so one of the other things that I learned that oceanographers do and people that do this a lot do is they take styrofoam cups, just regular styrofoam cups, and you decorate it, and then you put it on this instrument here. This is the CTD, and you put them in a basket, like a bag thing, it's like a net bag, like a laundry bag type thing. And you put them in there, and then when they put this machinery in the ocean, and it goes down the water column, the cups shrink due to the pressure in the water. And so then over there on the far right, you can see a finger. That's how small it shrunk. Yep, so that's just a regular size foam cup. So this was a pretty popular thing to do. You hear like, well guys, they're putting down a CTD, decorate your cups. So there were like big swarms of cups. And I did quite a few. Is Father Thomas one here? Or here, Julie, you can come up. I made one for the parish.
Oh, there I see the lion.
Goodness. Very cute. Saw you with Father Thomas.
Sure.
That's pretty cool.
No, that one specifically and a lot of mine didn't actually shrink all that much because we were actually, yes, we were in the ocean and we were on the water, but we were actually still on like a continental shelf, so it was actually still fairly shallow. I think the deepest it got, like where we were researching, was 800 to 1,000 meters, rather than like 5,000 meters, where they do shrink up. Someone brought an old cup that they had, and it was like itty bitty tiny. And so then that's all I have. And does anybody have any questions?
How big was the ship that you were on? Do you have any
I
idea,
couldn't have
lengthwise and so forth?
I'm trying to like think of like comparison wise. As far as like, it wasn't like a cruise ship, like a pleasure cruise ship size. It was nowhere near that size.
Right.
But for a research vessel, I think it was also still on the smaller size, but it was still big enough that you could fit, 65 people on board and have all of those rooms. So I'm thinking maybe the length of, like, from street to street. I'm thinking. Yeah, like the block, the size of the block, probably. So it was very large to me, because I've never done anything like that, but for ship size, it was on the smaller side. Yeah, because again, they don't usually have that many people on board at a time.
Could you do anything like for exercise? Yeah, I was.
Yes, I forgot to talk about that. So not only was going outside and getting fresh air very important and changing, like your surroundings, but exercise was also something. They did have a gym. So this ship, when my professor told me about the ship, he's like, it's a research vessel. It goes through ice and all this, and it's super cool. And then he started telling me, he's like, it's got a gym. It's got a lounge and a theater, and it's got a sauna. So it had all of these fantastic things, and I'm like, are you sure this isn't like a pleasure cruise ship? But those were all vital things. So getting exercise, getting up and walking around was extremely important. So people had their daily routine. Now, I can't tell you that everyone did gym. I did go to the gym fairly often as I could, just to get moving. Or I would take, me and one of the German scientists, we would take daily walks outside. So we would just do, when it was warmer out, we'd stay out a little bit longer, and we'd just like go around the main deck of the ship a couple times, and then when it was colder, we'd like run it. But exercise was definitely something very important, because you walk like 20 steps at once at any given time. But you did get a workout just walking around the ship, because the steps on the ship, the stairs, were very tall and steep, and the doors they're made to do this. They're extremely heavy, so that they don't like always just swing open. Something you always had to do was make sure everything was tied down, make sure everything was secure, especially if you were on open water. But the doors were extremely heavy, so you did get a workout opening and closing all of those doors, yeah. And lifting up those rock boxes, you did get a workout, but exercise was definitely important times we'd find a lot of the rocks. We could immediately tell by their coloration, some of the minerals that you can see on them, that they were volcanic. So you can look and you go instantly like, that's volcanic. But some of the things that we don't know is that, especially if they're older and they were kind of like shoved under the mud and everything, they're kind of weathered down, they're rounded, there's corals all over them, so you can't really deduct anything from it. So a lot of times you had to crack it open to actually see if it's a lava, which we got a lot of, is it vesicular, is it massive? Are there xenoliths in them? Because a lot of times we would saw open a rock and we'd find a xenolith, and you'd go, that's fantastic. There were also a type of rock that we found a lot called a breccia, and it's a bunch of jagged pieces, mostly if it's volcanic, it's ash and other particles of rock that are cemented together. And so a lot of times we find those and you can look and go, oh, that's a breccia. But a lot of times also if it was eroded or weathered down and just like rounded, we're like, is this a breccia? Is this a lava? So then we crack it open and then we can see if it has all those jagged pieces inside of it, it's made up of different class. We can go, okay, this is a breccia, it's not a lava. Or we crack it open and we go, this is a massive lava. And then we crack it open and go, oh no, it's a vesicular lava. So it's those kind of things.
Did you have a chapel?
We did not have a chapel, no. I did find time during my week that on Sunday nights Father Tom was very gracious and he let bring down one of the missals. So I got all my readings and I did my gospel readings and all that stuff. And I did, as often as I remembered, and specifically on Sundays, I would do spiritual communion. I did bring a rosary with me. I brought a crucifix with me. So there was definitely, I had my own prayer time, and I would pray, like my daily prayers in the morning and at night, and then on Sundays, my church prayers and readings and all that. So
You were solo with that.
I was pretty solo with that. I could not tell you that it came up in conversation very often, so I don't know how many other Christians or practicing Christians that there were on board. But fun fact about Antarctica, there is actually an Antarctic ice chapel in Antarctica on one of the stations. Yes.
It's ice chapel.
It's an ice chapel. Yep. So it's like an igloo.
Did the cold bother you very much?
Not at first. I can't say that it necessarily bothered me. It just got really cold, and I would spend a lot of time. I would just go out on the bow of the ship and just be outside and bask in being outside towards the beginning of the trip, but then towards the end when the decks, other than the back deck, were completely covered in snow. I did not spend a lot of time outside. I would just go outside and get some fresh air and then come straight back in because it was more of less the cold and the fact that it was windy. If you weren't wearing like your fleece gaiter or anything like your sunglasses or hat or anything like that, your skin just got a little freezer burn. And gloves were also very important. Sometimes I would go outside without gloves on and I regretted that deeply. And a lot of especially pictures of my penguins are not only blurry because my camera wasn't great, but also because my hands were shaking the entire time. It would be an instant like, you take off your gloves, you take the picture, you put your gloves back on. So I can't say that necessarily bothered me, but it did get extremely cold out. Did you want to say something?
How did you communicate with your family and stuff?
Okay, so that was a complicated question. When I was learning about this trip, and my professor had only done like a voyage, like on a vessel, one time before. He was only on continent. But he told me, and it was like 11 years ago. So he's like, oh, there was like no communication. You could send like maybe an email. There's barely any internet or anything like that. I got on this ship. It was fine. There was internet to spare. The ship had its own like internet satellite router thing. You did get a limited amount of data per day. So there was a certain time, because we were on a 24-hour clock, there was just a certain time, so it wasn't like midnight, I think it was like 1 p.m., that your data was restarted. Now, I did not spend that much time on the internet, but a lot of people were doing active research and they were reading things, so they did use up a lot of internet or sending out emails. But it was not hard. You could send out emails. A lot of people people did Skype interviews on the ship, but also because I didn't have necessarily like a foreign phone plan, I used WhatsApp to communicate with family and friends, and we could communicate. We could just send texts and images and all that stuff. So it wasn't that hard. I thought it was gonna be. I thought it was gonna be like nothing, and then I was like, oh, this is fine. I can watch movies. It was fine.
Can I speak to that a little bit?
Yeah.
I wanna thank all of you who prayed for her before she left. Thank you for praying for her while she was gone, but I, as mom, I know how many prayers were answered. Because as she said in the beginning, they said, oh, you can't have there's no internet, there's no this, and you're not gonna be able to communicate to your, so here I am, mom, my child is going to the end of the earth, I'm not gonna hear from her for 3 months, I'm not gonna know, and then I find out she's gonna be on the ship with like 60 some other scientists from all over the world, so my brain goes to, I don't know these people, I don't know what their moral code is, where are they coming from, what is their drive, like, is she gonna be, like, under the steps all beat up, or, all this stuff, and choom, 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 and as it got closer and closer, we got more and more, oh, it's not gonna be that bad, oh, it's gonna be okay, and, oh, she is gonna be able to do this, and da 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 da.
We were very comfortable.
And then once she was there and she was on the ship, we got, in the beginning, when they were in transit, we got a lot of communication from her. And then once she got really busy, she just didn't have time.
Yeah.
We still got communications from her, but they were definitely spaced out much more, several days, between hearing from her. But I am just so thankful for all the prayers that this parish and this, larger community of Bowling Green put into her, because we saw through the whole process of, oh, it's gonna be so great, so, oh, okay, it's gonna be okay, it's okay. And she, in the end, she got there, she came back.
I do say that the prayers were definitely appreciated, because there were so many moments throughout the ship that, like, I had, like, God moments where I was like, oh, this could be so bad right now, but it's not. There were a couple scary moments, I won't lie, that there were some moments that it was a little, like, nerve-wracking. So we did have weekly safety drills. So in case something happened to the ship and we had to evacuate the ship, we did have weekly evacuation drills. And they were usually always planned. We had one unplanned emergency call. So I had literally just like gotten washed up, and I was getting ready for bed, and the lights go completely out in my cabin, and the alarms start going off, and I start like, we didn't have a drill today, did we? And then my roommate comes in, just the same shock. She's like, do you need your stuff? I'm like, yeah, I'm getting my stuff. So what we had to do, we had a life jacket, a big bulky like brick, I like to call it, in our room, along with what they called our gum suit. And it was a skin-tight thermal suit that you have to put on. And it was kind of funny because in the beginning we had to like try them on, make sure you had like semi the right size. I mean, it was funny because everyone was like putting on these suits and they looked ridiculous, but they were made that way for a reason. And then we met at what they called what did they call them? There were certain areas on a ship that you had to go. So if you were scientists, we went to the conference room. That was another thing. They had a whole freaking conference room, the TV and everything. So we went to the conference room for our station, and the crew went somewhere else just to do roll call and all that kind of stuff. So there was one moment where the alarms go off. It was not planned or anything, and we go up and we're getting all the stuff. And you also had to have a ditch bag, so you had to have a bag packed at all times with your valuables and a change of clothes, so you could just grab it and leave. So we grabbed all of our stuff and we're sitting up in the conference room. Everyone's just kind of like nervous. We don't know what to do. We don't no idea what's going on. We don't know if we hit something or what. But one of the generators for the electricity blinked out for a split second, and that instantly triggers the alarms. But it came right back on. They were checking it out. There were several different generators. It was just one of them blinked out for a moment, and so that triggered the alarms. And so we all went. So that was a scary moment, but it was all okay. I kind of knew that God was with me and He was watching over us. But also another funny aspect of that is that we were surrounded by solid ice. So if we were in the escape boat, which is like completely enclosed, it's like a little torpedo thing. It would just like plop onto the ice. So we're kind of like, okay, what happens if we just like plop onto the ice? Like, what happens? Not only, but also like the beauty of the Antarctic. It was just so breathtaking. And I was just like, oh my gosh, God created this. This is not a place that everyone gets to see, and it's just so incredible. Another scary moment that was also a big blessing because it ended up being nothing at all, was because I talked about how the sheet ice like moved even though you weren't moving. So at one point the ship ended up being wedged between two of the ice sheets. And so I was in the forward dry lab just working, and there was like this humongous crash. Just bang, bang, bang. It was so loud, and everyone kind of like popped up and were like, what's going on? We're feeling the vibration throughout the ship because we're on the bottom level. And we're like, we don't know what's going on. And so me and another scientist, we run up to the bridge to look out the window and see if we could see anything. And it just looked like a regular day. Just the ice was there, the sun was down. But the captain and the first mate, they were doing an operation at the same time too. They were doing heat flow probe, which we have to be stationary for. And the captain was kind of on the radio. He's like, "Oh yeah, so can you bring up the heat flow probe? We kind of have a situation here." And we're all like, "Oh, that doesn't sound good." But it ended up just being like, yeah, the ship was wedged between two sheets of ice, so the two sheets of ice were like banging up and squeezing the ship. So if we had stayed stationary for very long, we would have been surrounded by ice and not been able to move. So they got the heat flow probe up as fast as possible, and we started moving, and we were just fine. So it was pretty much, as I was saying, as conditions worsened, operations were much harder to do, and at some point we just had to stop some of them. So yeah, prayers were absolutely amazing.
When you said how pretty it is it pretty much otherworldly? Like
It
a
kind
different
of
world?
is. There were moments where I'm just like, this doesn't feel real. And especially when I got back, I had to look back at pictures and be like, oh yeah, I was there. This was real. Like, this is a real place. It was kind of otherworldly. It was like nothing I've ever experienced.
What was the other nationalities that you worked with?
So that was another really fun aspect. It was an American boat, even though it's always usually ported in New Zealand. So most everyone was American, but there were Italian, German, French, Taiwanese, Japanese, Polish, Belgian, I'm trying to think, or maybe she was also Polish. So yeah, those were the main nationalities, but they're mostly all American, but also some of those people, especially the Japanese and Taiwanese people that I got to know really well, they live in America, but they're from somewhere else. They're part of Hui, so they're currently stationed there. And that was something really, really cool, because I got really close to, especially the French scientists and the German scientists. I got really, really close to, and the guy from Taiwan, we had a lot of fun teasing each other and getting to know other cultures. One thing that I thought was really funny was I figured out that in English we talk in a lot of phrases and odd terminology. We just like a phrase that I can say to you and me. I can't really think of an example right now, but we just like, you let the cat out of the bag. Like things like that. And he would look at me, the Taiwanese guy would look at me and go, what does that mean? Like, what are you saying? And so he would always try to use those terms that I would teach him. Like, I would just say it, just subconsciously, and then they would be like, what does that mean? And so I would make a tally of, I call them English isms, that I had to explain, and that was always fun. And then one of the French scientists, she would teach me a little bit of French. So my favorite French word, I know like 3, is pourquoi pas, and it means why not. So when they asked us, hey guys, do you want to do a dredge? We go, oh, pourquoi pas. So that was a huge thing. We would just say pourquoi pas all the time. And it was also funny because she would also try to, she was kind of learning English. She speaks English very well, but she was still kind of learning everything. And so she had this dictionary she would get out and she'd be like, how do you pronounce this or something? And one of the things is ish. You know how we say it was around noon-ish? She didn't know what that meant, so I had to explain it to her, and that became a huge thing throughout the ship. Everyone would purposefully use ish as often as possible.
Especially
And so she said her goal is to spread that across France. She loved it. So yeah, it was fun getting to know people from other countries.
What was your time difference from us?
Oh, Mom, do you know? I don't. It was like
It changed. So
18
it was
hours. 18. I was gonna say it was over 10 hours.
It was 18 hours, but then we had daylight savings time, so then
Yeah.
it was only 17 hours, but then she had daylight savings. She crossed and so then
Yeah.
it was back to 18 hours, but then when she went to New Zealand, then it went to 16 hours or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
So
Because we
it
were
was- most
in.
of the time it was 18.
Yeah, we were in New Zealand time. So a lot of the recording that I have to do was actually like, so I was staring at the time and date like all the time. Constantly was looking and recording the date and time. However, that was stateside date and time. So it was not what it was there on the boat. So there were times where I didn't know what day it was, I didn't know what time it was. So, and also we were across the international date line, so I was technically a day ahead and 18 hours ahead behind. I don't know, it was very confusing because I would get off my shift at midnight, and if I called my family, I was very thankful my phone was still on Ohio time. So, on one of the apps, so I knew exactly what it was in Ohio. So when I got off my shift at midnight, I would call my family occasionally, and it would be like 6 or 7 in the morning here the day before. So yeah,
But I was always up at that.
yeah, I knew she was up, so I called at that time. So that was very odd. Yeah, I never knew what day it was.
And then when she got home, it took her a long time to remember how to not use military time.
I still use military time. My brain is still wired that way. Yeah, we use 24-hour clock. Mm,
That's okay. That happens.
yeah, it was hard to adjust.
Oh, yeah, we did, sure.
Well, thank you for having me. I love talking to you.